Have you ever been afraid of a silence so deep, it begins to answer questions you never dared to ask? Not with words, but with memories. Not with sound, but with shadows. There's a silence that comes with age. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that knocks with no fist. That sits beside you without asking. That whispers not what you've lost, but who. And inside that silence, if you listen closely enough, you may hear something ancient. Something most people never live long enough to understand. Because the greatest lie we've ever been told is that peace means being untouched by pain. But the Buddha knew better. He spoke not of escape, but of turning inward. Not of conquering fear, but of holding it like a sleeping child. He knew that sometimes the path to liberation begins not with a step forward, but with a long exhale into the dark. So before we begin, I ask you not to believe anything I say. Just sit with me, as if we were two old souls in the last golden hour of the day, and listen, because what I'm about to share isn't a story, it's a remembering. Now, let me tell you something they never told me when I was younger. Where silence speaks louder than sound. They don't tell you this when you're young. That silence, in the later seasons of your life, will not feel the same. It changes. Just like you do. When you're young, silence is optional. It's the pause between songs, the sigh after laughter, the stillness that follows a full day. You welcome it as a kind guest. But as the years slip by, silence no longer knocks. It enters. Uninvited. It takes off its coat. And it stays. At first, it's gentle. You think this is peace. You pour your evening tea. You sit in the chair that remembers the shape of your body. You look toward the kitchen where someone once stood, humming while washing dishes. And then it hits you. The silence isn't soft anymore. It's dense. Not empty. Full of absence. The clock ticks. Not to mark time, but to remind you of it. Each second lands like a soft hammer. You are here. And they are not. And then the questions arrive not shouted, but whispered. The kind of whispers that linger in the hallway when no one's home. Did I do enough? What happens if I fall, and no one comes? Why do I feel like something's missing, even when nothing's wrong? These questions are not dramatic. They are ordinary. And yet, they carry the full weight of a lifetime. They aren't just thoughts. They are echoes, existential footprints left behind by the years we lived without noticing the ground we walked on. And that, my dear listener, is anxiety. Not the frantic panic of youth, but the quiet kind like fog creeping under the doorway at dawn. You don't notice it's there until you can't see the floor. Western culture teaches us to silence these feelings. To light a candle. Play music. Take a walk, scroll. Escape. But Buddhism turns the gaze inward. It asks not how do I get rid of this, but what is this trying to show me? The Buddha didn't say anxiety is a flaw. He called it dukkha, the subtle suffering that arises not from pain itself, but from our resistance to it. From the illusion that life should be permanent, predictable, preserved. We cling. We cling to routines. To identities. To people we love. To the idea that we are safe, that we are in control. But control is a dream. And clinging is the cause of the ache in the chest. The mind clenched like a fist around something that has already slipped away. The Buddha invites us to loosen the grip. Not with force, but with presence. With breath. With a soft yes to what is, instead of a desperate no to what was. You see, the chair isn't lonely. The silence isn't cruel. The fear isn't your enemy. They're just reflections of a mind being asked to let go of the stories it has outgrown. And when you sit with these things not as curses, But as teachers, something beautiful begins to unfold. Not peace in the sense of everything is okay, but peace in the sense of I am okay, even when everything changes. The stillness is no longer empty. It becomes sacred. Like a temple built from memory, lit by the gentle lantern of awareness. So when that feeling comes, the quiet tightness in your chest, the fog around your thoughts, don't run. Sit. Listen. And whisper back. I hear you. I know you're here. I am not afraid. Because anxiety, when met with compassion, begins to loosen. And silence, when held with mindfulness, begins to sing. Stories etched in quiet years. Tom wasn't just a man. He was a rhythm. Every morning, like clockwork, you'd hear the soft creak of his porch door opening at exactly 6 a.m. Rain, frost, or fog, he walked. Not for exercise. Not for escape. But because something about the path around the lake answered a question inside him he didn't know how to ask. He was a Navy man. Order and discipline ran through his bones like blood. The world made sense when his boots hit the trail and the wind kissed his face. That trail wasn't just dirt and gravel. It was identity. It was memory. It was prayer. And then, one morning, he didn't walk. It wasn't dramatic. No ambulance. No fall. Just a quiet ache in the hip that became something more. And just like that, his mornings unraveled. He would sit at the window, same mug, same hour, but the stillness had changed. The trail still wrapped around the lake, glistening in morning light, but it no longer led him anywhere. I feel like I've lost a piece of who I am, he said once, not looking at me but at his reflection in the window. And I nodded, not because I understood fully, but because I felt that same ghost pass through me too. It's not the body that breaks your heart. It's what the body takes with it. In Buddhist teachings, the Buddha told us with a still, unwavering clarity. Whatever is subject to arising is subject to ceasing. We often hear this like a mantra, but do we ever truly sit with it? Everything that comes, must go. Not as a punishment. Not because we did something wrong. But because impermanence is not a flaw in the system, it is the system. Tom wasn't suffering because he could no longer walk. He was suffering because he was resisting the truth that he was no longer the man who walked. And that's the root of so much of our anxiety in old age. We mistake our stories for ourselves. We think we are the habits, the identities, the achievements, the roles. The man who provides. The woman who holds the family together. The neighbor who always shows up. The one who remembers every birthday. And when those roles begin to dissolve either through aging, retirement, death, or change, we feel like we're disappearing with them. But the Buddha, in his compassion, shows us a deeper truth. You are not the routine. You are not your youth. You are not the image in the mind of others. You are awareness itself. The one watching. The one remembering. The one still breathing, even when everything else has moved on. Tom's grief wasn't about the trail. It was about identity loss. But identity, when clung to, is the heaviest burden of all. You see, when we cling to who we were, and we resist who we are now becoming, we create suffering between the two. A gap. A tension. That tension is anxiety. And yet, there is a quiet freedom that waits for us in the letting go. A lotus that blooms in the mud. A spaciousness that says, even now, I am still here. Even now, I am still whole. And when Tom began to slowly release the idea of the man he was, when he allowed himself to simply be, to sip tea at the window without judgment, without shame, he began to return. Not to the trail, but to himself. I saw it the day he told me. I don't walk anymore. But now, I sit. And I watch the birds I never noticed before. That's what acceptance looks like. Not defeat. But the beginning of a softer kind of presence. Because in truth, life is not about holding on. It's about learning how to live open-handed. Let go a little, and the pain softens. Let go a lot, and the anxiety loosens. Let go completely, and what remains is peace. A thought that unravels the storm. There is a moment. It doesn't come with thunder. It doesn't knock. It arrives in silence. Like a shadow slipping beneath the door. Like cold air against the skin when the fire dies out. It might be during a quiet morning. Or in the middle of folding laundry. Or when the sun has fallen below the trees and the house grows dim. And suddenly, it's there. What if this is it? What if nothing changes? What if I never feel okay again? It settles in the chest like a stone. No words. Just a feeling. A hum beneath the ribs. A tightness behind the eyes. A weight that doesn't belong to any one moment. But somehow belongs to all of them. That, my dear listener, is not fear. It's not sorrow. It's thought dressed in emotion, carried by memory, amplified by silence. And yet, for years, I believed it was me. I believed the thoughts that came in the night were true because they were loud. Because they came so often. Because they sounded like my own voice. Until one day, sitting in the back of a small mindfulness group at the community center, I heard a teacher say something so gentle, so plain, it stopped my breath. This too, is just a thought. Just a thought? That idea felt impossible. How could something that lives so deep in me, that makes my hands tremble, that keeps me awake, that steals the taste from food, how could that be just a thought? But slowly, as the days passed, I began to test it. Every time the storm rolled in, I would sit quietly, put a hand on my chest, and whisper, "This too is just a thought. You are not me. You are not the whole of me. You are just passing through." At first, it felt like lying to myself. But over time, something began to shift. I started noticing that my thoughts came and went. But I remained. They changed tone. They changed shape. They changed subject. But I, the one watching, the one breathing, I was still there. This is what Buddhism calls non-identification. The understanding that your thoughts are not your identity. They are weather. You are the sky. The thought may say, "You're not safe." But the breath says, "You are here." The thought may scream, "You are broken." But the body, even in stillness, says, "I am whole." And when we stop fusing with every thought that arises, when we no longer build homes in their shadows, something amazing begins to happen. The storm loses its thunder. The waves soften. The sea becomes navigable again. Let me share a story. Marlene was a widow, 76, with a house far too quiet for its square footage. She told me once that her greatest fear wasn't death, it was being forgotten while still alive. She'd sit in the living room and think, what if I fall? What if I forget something important? What if I become a burden to my children? And those thoughts, like vines, grew. They wrapped around her days, strangled her appetite, drained her joy. Until one afternoon, at our mindfulness class, she was asked to write on a card, "This thought is not me. It is just a thought." She kept it in her pocket. And every time the fear returned, she'd place her hand over that card and breathe. Not to make the thought vanish, but to remember who she was beneath it. That's the secret. Not to fight the thought. Not to deny it. But to recognize it for what it is. A guest, not a resident. A flicker, not a fire. Because the moment you name it, the moment you whisper, "I see you," you are just a thought. You move from being inside the storm to standing beside it. And that, dear listener, is freedom. As Ajahn Chah once said, If you let go a little, you'll have a little peace. If you let go a lot, you'll have a lot of peace. If you let go completely, you'll be free. So the next time the fear arrives unannounced, don't prepare for battle. Just prepare a cup of tea. Invite it to sit. And say, you may stay. But I will not become you. You may pass through. But you will not define me. Because I know the truth now. This too is just a thought. The practice of mindfulness. It begins so quietly. A flicker. A hum. You're holding a cup of tea, and something shifts. You can't name it. But you feel it. Like a draft beneath the door. A faint unease that doesn't knock, but simply enters. You look around the room. Nothing's wrong. But your breath feels shallow. Your chest tight. Your thoughts no longer background music, have become a storm front rolling in. And yet, there's no lightning. Just the weight of being. This is how anxiety arrives for many of us in our later years, not loud, but persistent. Not sharp, but steady. It's not that something's happening. It's that nothing is, and your mind no longer knows what to do with that space. But the Buddha gave us a key. Not to escape, but to return. Mindfulness. Not the trend. Not the hashtag. But the ancient art of being with what is. Not fixing. Not fleeting. Just noticing. Fully. Kindly. The Western world teaches us that productivity is worth, that speed is value. But mindfulness says otherwise. Be where your feet are. The moment is enough. Let me tell you about Frank. He was a quiet man. A carpenter. Hands like oak, eyes like rain. After his wife passed, he told me, the house doesn't feel empty. It feels echoey. Like I'm walking through memory instead of space. And in those long, soft afternoons, anxiety would sneak in like dust through sunlight. What if I forget something important? What if I fall? What if I start losing myself piece by piece? So he joined our mindfulness group. He sat in the back. Never said a word for 3 weeks. Until one day, the teacher asked us simply to breathe. Don't force it. Don't chase stillness. Just be with your breath. As you would with a dear friend you haven't seen in years. Frank sat with his eyes closed, hands on his lap. Later he told me, at first, all I noticed was noise, the clanging of my own mind. But then, I noticed the breath. Then the birds. Then the warmth in my hands. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. That's the gift of mindfulness. It doesn't silence the storm. It reminds you you are not the storm. You are the sky that holds it. Each breath becomes an anchor. Each step becomes a homecoming. Each moment becomes an invitation. Return to now. Mindfulness doesn't ask us to erase our thoughts. It asks us to witness them gently. Like leaves floating by on a stream. No need to chase, no need to hold. And if the mind wanders, as it will, you simply notice that you noticed. That is the practice. There is no failure. The very act of returning is the miracle. The Buddha said, do not dwell in the past. Do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. Not because the present is perfect, but because it's the only place we ever truly live. So when the worry begins to hum again, when the stillness feels sharp, and the evening air presses in, do this. Sit. Breathe. Feel your feet on the floor. Notice the rhythm of your inhale and exhale. Place your hands gently over your chest. And whisper, I am here. And here is enough. Because the practice of mindfulness isn't a destination. It's a soft returning again and again and again. And with every return, the nervous system whispers back, you're safe now. You are not lost. You are home. Compassion, the kindness that softens anxiety. There is a voice. It doesn't shout. It murmurs. But it murmurs often. Especially in the quiet hours. Especially when we're tired. Especially when we need kindness the most. Why are you like this? You should be stronger. You're such a burden. You don't remember where this voice came from. Maybe a childhood too strict. Maybe a culture that praised stoicism. Maybe just the long shadow of years spent caring for everyone else but yourself. But that voice settles into your bones. And when anxiety comes, it doesn't arrive alone, it brings shame. A shame for feeling. A shame for struggling. A shame for simply being human. But here's what I've learned, sitting with these years folded softly in my lap. You cannot heal through cruelty. Even if that cruelty is quiet, polite, internal. The Buddha taught us about metta-loving kindness. Not just as an idea, but as a medicine. And like any medicine, it must be taken daily. Especially when the pain is loud. Especially when the voice inside turns cold. Let me tell you about Ruth. Ruth was a nurse. For 35 years, she held hands that trembled in hospital beds. She carried children out of burning fevers. She sat beside her sister through cancer treatments. She never cried, not once, because someone always needed her. But when retirement came, and when her sister passed, Ruth found herself in an empty house. And the voice came. Why are you feeling this now? You've always held it together. Don't fall apart. Not now. At first, she tried to power through. She cleaned. She volunteered. She folded and refolded laundry that didn't need folding. But the ache didn't leave. And then, one Sunday, she sat beside me during a mindfulness retreat. The teacher invited us to place our hands gently over our hearts. And to whisper 3 simple phrases. May I be kind to myself. May I hold my pain with love. May I remember that I am enough. At first, Ruth laughed. She said it felt silly. Childish. Weak. But she kept trying. And slowly, like a wound healing from the inside out, something softened. Some mornings, she told me, I don't need to be strong. I just need to be gentle. That's the power of compassion. It doesn't erase anxiety. It simply says, you don't have to walk through this alone. You see, we are so quick to show compassion to others. But to ourselves, we demand perfection. We punish softness. We withhold comfort. But Buddhist wisdom reminds us, you are also deserving. You too are part of this world that suffers and heals. And when anxiety rises, not as a monster, but as a frightened child within you, try this. Don't scold it. Don't silence it. Sit beside it. Offer it tea. Place your hand on your chest. And say, I know you're scared. I am here. And I will not abandon you. Because compassion is not weakness. It is the softest form of courage. It's what allows us to stop running. To stop pretending. To finally rest in our own arms. As Thich Nhat Hanh once said, when you love someone, the best thing you can offer is your presence. How can you love if you are not there? That includes yourself. If you cannot be present with your own pain, who will be? So when the world grows heavy, and your mind begins to ache with the noise of doubt and fear, return to this. This, too, is worthy of love. Even this. Especially this. You are not too much. You are not too fragile. You are not failing. You are simply learning. After so many years of being strong, how to finally be tender with yourself. And that is sacred. The final realization. A soft truth, revealed not in words but in the quiet after everything else has been said. There comes a point in the journey. Not at the beginning, not in the middle, but somewhere deep in the quiet woods of aging, where you no longer seek answers. You begin, instead, to sit beside the questions. The ones that have followed you for years. Who am I, without the roles I used to play? What remains, when everything I once called mine fades? Is it too late, to feel whole? And in that stillness, in the space beyond striving, beyond trying to fix, or understand, or control, a truth begins to unfold. Not as thunder, not as revelation, but as a single breath. One, quiet, breath. And with it, the realization. Peace isn't something we earn. It's something we remember. It was never waiting at the end of the journey. It was here, all along beneath the noise, beneath the ache, beneath the clinging and the pushing and the pretending. It was in the way your chest rises and falls, even in sorrow. It was in the soft hum of the refrigerator at midnight. In the warmth of tea between your palms. In the memory of someone's laughter still echoing, still yours. The Buddha never promised a life without suffering. He never said we'd escape fear or aging or grief. But he did offer this. Freedom is possible, not by avoiding pain, but by meeting it with full presence. And that's the final teaching. Not a doctrine. Not a step-by-step plan. But a gentle returning. Returning to this moment. Returning to your breath. Returning to yourself without judgment. Just presence. Just now. And maybe that's enough. You don't need to be the version of yourself from 20 years ago. You don't need to have it all figured out. You don't need to chase stillness. You are already the stillness. You are already the sky. You are already home. So when anxiety returns, not if, but when. Because it will. Meet it not with resistance, but with kindness. Sit with it. Offer it silence. Offer it your breath. And when you are ready, say, "This is not mine. This is not me. This is not who I am." Then stand. Stretch. Feel your feet on the floor. And return to the dishes, to the window, to the sound of birds. To life. Because peace is not the absence of pain. It's the presence of love in spite of it. And you, dear listener, you who have come this far, who have felt this deeply, you are not broken. You are not late. You are not lost. You are simply becoming. And that, at any age, is a sacred thing. So, if you feel that heaviness in your chest tonight, don't rush to silence it. Don't pour noise into your loneliness. Don't run from the ache like it's something wrong. Instead, treat it like an old traveler who's been carrying a message for years. Sit down beside it. Offer it a warm cup of tea. And listen. Not to fix it. Not to fight it. But simply, to witness it. And when you're ready, gently return. Return to this breath. To the weight of your feet on the floor. To the soft light spilling across your room. Because here, dear soul, right here, right now, is enough. And you are enough. If this voice tonight has touched something quiet in you, something tired, something searching, then come back. Stay close. Subscribe to Whisper of Age. Not for entertainment, but for remembrance. Here, we don't offer perfect answers. We offer presence. We offer pause. We offer a place for your inner silence to be heard. And before we part tonight, I want to leave you with this. The storms in your mind are not flaws. They are invitations. To return. To feel. To live gently, again. Because the point of life was never to avoid the breaking. It was to discover that even when things fall apart, you are still whole. So breathe. Let go of what no longer serves you. And walk forward, not quickly, but softly. As if every step was a prayer whispered back to the earth. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to stay long enough to hear your own heart again.